There has been a lot of concern about the potential impact of rising trade barriers on the auto sector. But our guest today says it's not the direct impact of tariffs that investors need to be concerned about. Joining us now to discuss, Itay Michaeli, Senior Analyst for Autos and Auto Parts at TD Cowen. And for full disclosure on the companies covered by TD Cowen, please see the link to the website at the end of this video. Great to have you with us here on the program. Obviously, when it comes to tariffs over the past several months, people are just trying to figure out what does it mean for this sector, what does it mean for that sector. There is discussion around the automakers, Itay, but you say maybe more indirect. Walk me through that.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be on. A lot of the impact we're watching right now is on consumer demand. I think at this point we have a pretty good sense of what the tariff impacts will be on the individual company. Still some questions and unknowns, but generally we have a pretty good visibility there. So we are watching demand very closely. The good news is May U.S. auto sales did come in about 2% above our forecast. There was some concern coming into May because of the pre-buy that we saw in the month of March and April as some consumers rushed to buy vehicles ahead of tariffs. But May did still hold in reasonably well for U.S. auto demand, coming in a little bit above our expectations.
When it comes to that demand, obviously you talk about, we know individually in the companies, if you're going to have a higher input cost, it could mean this. A company could choose to swallow that and, compress the margins a little bit. But is that demand really about the greater economic uncertainty? People saying, well, this is a big purchase. I don't know what 6 months from now look like.
We did see some of that early in March and April, but our view has been that the folks pre-buying vehicles in March and April probably were some of the folks who are going to be buying new vehicles in May or June. So we still have to watch June very carefully. And so May was really the first test of what will the consumer do, A, given the macro and tariff uncertainty, and B, to your question, given some of the pre-buy that we saw in the prior 2 months. And so May was fairly encouraging that we did see unit sales come in a little bit above our expectation. Inventory levels are in good shape. And one other interesting data point is the all-important pickup truck market, which is a big profit center in the U.S. We saw sales of pickup trucks rise by 14% year over year. And I bring that up not only because it's an important end market within auto, but also if we look at prior cycles, including, of course, 2008, 2009, the pickup truck end market at that time significantly underperformed the market. So nice to kind of see it outperform here in May. But yes, we still have to keep a very close eye on what happens in June.
I find the pickup story very interesting, considering maybe only 3 or 4 years ago, if we're having a discussion about where will the demand would be, it would be probably a discussion about electric vehicles. We know there's been shifting demand in that space, shifting production. What is going on?
Yeah, we have seen certainly a slowdown in EV adoption, including in Q1, although in Q1 there were a number of other factors like product changeovers, Model Y being an example that we think had some impact as well. And of course, automakers have been adjusting their production capacity and even their product plans for an expectation of kind of slower EV adoption. But over time, we still have a bit more of a constructive view on where EV demand is headed over the medium and longer term. Primarily because in the U.S. we do have 2 vehicles per household. And so in a scenario where consumers were to increasingly opt to have one internal combustion vehicle or hybrid and one EV, that alone could drive some significant demand growth over time. And we have seen some pockets regionally in the U.S. where that we think has actually begun to happen. But over the near term, yeah, we have seen that slow down. It's going to be really interesting to see over the next few quarters as we do get some more new product entries into the market where EV demand ultimately goes to. And of course, you do have the backdrop of the regulations as well, and incentives that are going to play some role in that as well.
Is it still about the technology? I mean, I think when people try to understand what's going on with the EVs and maybe why they want them on a hybrid or just a traditional ICE engine, they still have range anxiety. I know we've made great strides in that area, but are people still ultimately a little bit unsure about what they're getting when they get an EV?
Yeah, if you're a first-time buyer, certainly that is one of the primary focal areas. What's my range? What's my charging capability? And certainly if you do have 2 vehicles per household, that does give you some optionality, for example, to take the non-EV vehicle you might have on a longer trip, particularly in the wintertime where EV range can be sometimes compromised. So that is still an issue, but we are seeing range improve. Of course, charging infrastructure improve as well. Pricing has come down. Price is still a bit of an issue as well. But what's really interesting interesting about EVs is even though demand has slowed in the new vehicle market, EV to EV loyalty is still very, very high. In other words, people who own an EV and come back for another vehicle, they tend to stick with EVs at a very high rate, even higher than some of the other propulsion systems out there. And so we're not really seeing signs necessarily of a buyer regret, but more of a slowdown in the overall level of adoption because of some of these factors that you mentioned.
Oh, that's very interesting. All right. Another headline that's been around the trade talks, not only about tariffs when you're talking about China, the U.S. meeting in London earlier this week, rare earth metals and magnets. We know they're key to a lot of industries. What's the impact on the auto industry?
Yeah, it's something we're watching closely. It's been called out as a potential risk, and it still is something we have to watch closely, as a potential risk of disrupting production or slowing production. But from speaking with companies, even including this week, so far we're not seeing signs of any, wide-scale production disruptions. And so it seems like it's moving somewhat in the right direction, but we have to kind of keep a close eye on it. So far, no signs of disruption, but it's still something we have to keep an eye on.
All right, the future, obviously, of automobiles, we have been told by many companies and many entrepreneurs, is autonomous vehicles. Where are they? I mean, I know they're out there. I know they're in test mode, but how is the trend progressing?
Yeah, it's definitely a key topic this year, and you're seeing robo-taxi rollouts and expansion. So in some ways, autonomous vehicles are actually already here, which is of course pretty exciting. But there's also going to be a lot more to come, we think, across other autonomous vehicle verticals. When we think about the overall personal mobility market in the U.S., it's about a $1.4 trillion market. The rideshare industry today is maybe about $60 billion and growing. And so as robo-taxis continue to scale, you'll see some growth in the rideshare vertical, but we're also pretty focused on what we call the consumer AV vertical. So think of features that you can have on vehicles that you own, some really interesting services that could be layered on top of it. The vehicle dropping you off at the movie theater and then picking you up later, or even getting deliveries for you in the middle of the night, or of course sharing the vehicle with a robo-taxi network. So there's a lot of other verticals that we've written about that the auto industry and others are pursuing to effectively improve vehicle utilization, generate more revenue, and ultimately create more customer loyalty and a better experience.